Welcome back to School of Speech, the podcast for school-based SLPs who love digging into the why behind language and literacy. I'm your host, Carolyn Dolby, and I have to say, I absolutely nerded out over this conversation. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Ginger Collins, and we are taking a deep, fascinating look at the meaning of words. If you have ever wondered why English spelling feels so inconsistent, and why students struggle with so-called irregular words, or how morphology can unlock stronger vocabulary, spelling, and reading skills, this episode is for you. Dr. Collins breaks down morphology-based approaches that school SLPs can use in real classrooms in collaboration with teachers to support upper elementary and secondary students. We talk about how examining words by their morphemes, not just sounds, help students make sense of spelling, decoding, and vocabulary across content areas. This conversation challenges the idea that words have to be memorized by sight, and instead offers practical, research-based strategies like morpheme-based, structured word inquiry, and collaborative classroom supports that actually stick. If you are a language-loving SLP like me, who enjoys connecting linguistics, literacy, and real-world instruction, you are going to absolutely love this episode. So let's dig into the structure and meaning of words. This is School of Speech. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Carolyn Dolby and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for School of Speech. School of Speech is designed specifically for the school-based clinician, for us all to come together to discuss current topics, tackle some difficult situations, and really just come and share our insights. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. I'm excited for today's episode, morphology-based approaches to improve vocabulary knowledge, spelling, and reading in the classroom. We have Dr. Ginger Collins with us today as we discuss how school-based clinicians can collaborate with classroom teachers to strengthen the upper elementary and secondary students' literacy skills, emphasizing morphological knowledge, resulting in positive impacts in spelling, decoding, and vocabulary knowledge. I need to start with some disclosures. Starting with Dr. Collins, she receives a salary from the University of Montana, and she is also receiving an honorarium from SpeechTherapyPD.com for her participation today. Non-financial, Ginger is the founding member of the Structured World Inquiry Research Vanguard, and some of the interventions that she will include in this podcast today will include some of those approaches. For me, I receive a salary as the district level dysphagia support clinician for Cy-Fair Independent School District. I am also compensated for my graduate courses I teach at the University of Houston, and I'm a consultant for school districts across the nation supporting program development and staff training. And I receive compensation from SpeechTherapyPD.com to host this podcast. Non-financial, I'm a member of the Texas Speech and Hearing Feeding and Swallowing Task Force. I volunteer for Feeding Matters, and I'm a member of ASHA's Special Interest Groups 13, Swallowing and Swallowing Disorders, as well as SIG 16, School-Based Issues. I want to introduce Ginger. Dr. Collins is a professor and program director at the University of Montana. Her teaching and research focus on literacy interventions with morphology at the core. Dr. Collins also conducts research and teaches about post-secondary transition planning and stuttering. Dr. Collins is a founding member of the Structured World Inquiry Research Vanguard. Structured World Inquiry is a method of investigating the spelling of words through examination of their morphological composition, etymology, and grapheme-phoneme correspondences. Wow, mouthful, but hello, Dr. Collins. We're so glad you're here.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, so Ginger, let's get started. I'd love to know some of your background, your history. Where did you come from and how did we get here?
Sure. I'm currently in Montana, as you said, but I am originally from Louisiana. And before I went on to get my doctorate, I was working as a school-based SLP. And particularly in middle school, I really do enjoy those older kids I think the younger ones are pretty stinking cute, but I really enjoy working with the upper elementary through high school, even young adult age groups. And I was working in a middle school, and one of the things I did notice quite a bit was that the students' vocabulary knowledge was lacking, and it was just such a barrier to their accessing the curriculum. And I remember working closely with the middle school science teacher, seventh grade science teacher in particular. And he came to me, and I have to say kudos to the science teacher who recognized the language barrier, that he came to me and said, hey, I really noticed that my students are struggling. I teach them a word and we talk about it all day. And then the very next day, it's like it just slipped through their fingers. It just, they didn't remember what it meant. And he said, these kids are smart, but what's going on? And so I went in, I did a classroom observation, and he was absolutely right that they were having difficulty retaining that vocabulary knowledge. So we just got creative and we said, okay, we're going to create kind of similar to a word wall. We see those very frequently in the lower elementary grades. It's very common. You don't see them as often in middle school and high school, which I think is a shame because they're still really beneficial. But we didn't do whole words. We did what we called at the time word parts, morphemes, but we weren't calling them that with the students. But, so we were talking about things like, geology and hydrology or something like that. And so we would break it down into those Latin and Greek roots. And we would describe the meaning, and we had a board where we had all, like a bulletin board where we had all of these words that were being commonly used in the lesson plans. And it was really fun after we did that. And we got the kids involved too, and they helped us create the board. So it wasn't just us, kind of doing it for them. They were part of it. And we just kind of did some observations of while he was teaching, we would see eyes glancing over quickly at the board. And kids were very independently like, oh, what's that word again? And they didn't have to disrupt anything. They were still listening to what the teacher was saying, just a quick glance over to the board. And he said it made all the difference in the world. And that's really what got me interested. And I felt very validated later when I did get into academia. I'm like, oh, yeah, there's really a lot of empirical evidence supporting this approach, which I didn't know at the time. But, that's how we all do, right? When we're in the schools, sometimes you got to try something and see if it works.
Right. I mean, right there, that's part of the evidence-based practice is your
practice-based evidence.
Yeah, exactly. That's fantastic. So why don't we get into more of, I guess, when you're looking at, you started doing the smaller words, but wouldn't it be easier for students to spell and read words if they were just spelled exactly how they were pronounced?
Well, that's a common misconception, I would say. I think I hear that quite a bit. I see that on social media, mainly because I touch on these things in my classes. And then, after my graduate students graduate, they friend me on Facebook or Instagram, and then they're constantly sending me these things. Like, how crazy the English language is. And it's like, well, not really. So there's a common misconception that spelling really should represent how words are pronounced. That spelling is supposed to be this one-to-one, letter to sound, or grapheme to phoneme relationship, when spelling actually encompasses much more about a word than just its pronunciation. In fact, the primary function of spelling is to represent what words mean rather than how they are pronounced. So it's been really well established that it's much easier to read words that you understand rather than words that you don't. And how a word is spelled provides a lot of insight into its meaning. So if you can just imagine, let's say, maybe not for somebody who is a skilled phonologist, but like for the average SLP, imagine reading a page of text in English and reading a page of text written entirely in the International Phonetic Alphabet. So IPA gives us very clear indications of pronunciation, but the reader is given little or maybe no information about what those words mean. The spelling of that, the IPA doesn't provide that. And it's going to be a slog. It's going to be really much slower to read IPA which is giving us all about that information about pronunciation, as opposed to just reading in typical English orthography. And this is particularly true with homophones. So if you have a word like prince, do you know if I'm talking about P-R-I-N-T-S or P-R-I-N-C-E in IPA?
No.
No,
Oh,
absolutely.
wow.
Yeah. So, that the spelling tells us a lot about the word, especially with the P-R-I-N-T-S. We have a little additional morphological information. We know that it's plural as opposed to P-R-I-N-C-E, which is a single morpheme by itself. Our ability to read fluently is significantly disrupted without that ready access to the meanings of words.
Wow, that was a huge eye opener for me. Just using one example, using the IPA versus the English written, that was a big aha for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that some people can even read whole words faster than they can recite alphabet letters because the words have a lot more meaning.
Absolutely.
So if you're just reading a list of letters as opposed to a list of real words, or reading in context is much faster than reading a list of words, even when the list of words is less complex, simplistic words, but they're devoid of meaning because they're isolated. They're not contextualized within a sentence or a paragraph.
Wow. It's amazing how it's almost like when you're reading it in context, that you're chunking it and making.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely.
I know that a lot of teachers and SLPs are often really uncertain on how to begin teaching spelling, decoding, especially those irregular words. Often, they're saying that these are the sight words that they just need to memorize. Right. Do you have any suggestions on how to handle those irregular words?
Sure, but first I'd like to point out that the reason these words are often referred to as irregular is that they don't conform to the, and I'll say so-called spelling rules, because these so-called rules are most often based on what we observe most frequently. So I don't know how good of an analogy this is, but I'll give it a whack. Let's say if we see a wren and we see a robin and we see a woodpecker, and we see an owl, and you say, okay, these are all birds. So birds have feathers and wings and they fly, right? Well, then you see a penguin and it's like, well, it's got wings, but it doesn't have feathers. And I don't think they have feathers anyway. I'm not a penguin expert, but I from pictures I've seen, they don't appear to have feathers. They don't fly. Emus, are these large birds that they do have feathers, but they don't fly. So, do we call those, well, those are irregular birds? Or is it because that's what we have, imposed upon them? Like this is, since I've seen all these other birds, they all fly, they all have feathers. So that's what a bird is. Now, if you're going to come into this group, then you're going to be an irregular bird. Well, that's the way I think, the birds and the words go together with this, because we, instead of the birds and the bees, we have the birds and the words. So we have words, and maybe you've seen something like the silent E. It's like, okay, the E is silent. It's going to make that medial vowel say its own name, and that becomes a rule. And then you have words that it doesn't really work with, like love or come. And it's like, well, then those become irregular, but it's only irregular because of these imposed rules, not because that's an authentic rule that governs all of these words. So I think that's just worth pointing out. And hopefully my analogy wasn't too confusing or too convoluted, and hopefully that made sense.
No, I loved it. Birds and words, that tied it all together. I mean, because we don't call them irregular birds. Exactly. Right. So
still birds.
They're still birds.
They don't have, maybe as a common as a feature as some of these other birds have in common, but they're still birds. So we can't impose this rule and say, well, all birds have feathers, all birds fly, except for these irregular birds, And that's what we're doing with words, though. We're saying, these are the rules. And then we have these other ones that don't conform. So you just have to memorize those. However, I would say that you don't just have to memorize that, because these so-called rules are often just based on those observations about how most words are spelled with little or no attention paid to what those words mean. So getting to the meaning, that's where I would focus. I would say, let's go back to the meaning of that word. Let's go back to that word's history and investigate it a bit, because that's going to give us a lot of clues. Because remember what I said earlier, that spelling is much more about meaning than it is about pronunciation. And so we need to attack, or not, that sounds so aggressive. We need to really investigate the meaning. And so just as an example, a really common one, the number 2, TWO, right? So it doesn't really conform. This is one of those words that's frequently called an irregular word, a sight word, a heart word, whatever you want to call it. You just have to memorize it. So, why is it called that? Well, we have the open syllable rule, where if, the word ends in a single syllable, then, I'm sorry, not a single syllable, in a single vowel at the end, it's not closed in by a consonant at the end, that the long O should be pronounced, such as in words like go and no and so. So, okay, that's a bit irregular. And also we see that the W is in there, but we don't pronounce it. So it's a silent W. So these two reasons kind of give it this category of irregularity. But a different way to look at this word, TWO, is to examine its history or its etymology. That's what we talk about whenever we're looking at the history of a word, where it comes from. So the etymology, and I will say one quick tool that I think everyone should have in their toolbox is the online etymology dictionary. It's Etym Online. They have a nice app too. It's on the first screen of my phone. I use it all the time. But anyway, because we never are going to know all of these words. And well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I think I'm going to go back to this example of TWO, the number 2. So we're maybe we can look at these things. So the O, we just know that over time, words take on different pronunciation patterns. And this is a very old word. It's a number. So it got used frequently, early and often. So some of these spellings get fossilized, from the past. And so I don't have a good handle on its etymology to know why it's pronounced, oo instead of o. I just know that it's a really old word, and probably somewhere down the road, the pronunciation formed or shifted. But as far as this silent W, I think that's much more interesting because one thing I'm not sure that everyone's aware of is that a lot of words are spelled with these silent letters, or these, what we might call irregular spellings. Those were deliberate decisions made by people who wrote dictionaries, people who had printing presses, because they wanted to retain the history of the word. They wanted people to know where the word came from. So it's not a fluke. That was actually a decision made by somebody somewhere down the road. And 2 is one of those examples. But if you think about other words that are related, to that share an etymological root, we have words like twin. Twin has the W, and it means, 2 babies born from the same womb. 12, 2 and 12 make a lot more sense together whenever we have that W in there, as opposed to not having the W. Twist, combining 2 into 1, that was kind of like the original meaning of that word. Twine, 2 threads twisted together. Between, twice. Twilight even shares an etymological root with the number 2, because you've got light and dark, in equal measure. So it's the 2 kind of competing there. Even the word twig or twill, they all share an etymological root. So twig is whenever you have a fork in a tree, so it comes off as like a little branch. So there's 2 paths you could take on that tree. Twill it literally means woven with double thread. So, but now that you know this, will you ever forget that the number 2, not that Carolyn, I'm sure you knew how to spell the number 2, but would you ever forget?
No, but I will never not think about the history of 2. And now all these words, they make so much more sense now. So then if you've explained, okay, this is where I'm standing right now, because my mind's a little blown right now, honestly, Ginger. So, okay, two with the TW, meaning the number two, double. Then if somebody heard the word, let's say twill for the first time and had never heard the word twill, I think this is where you're leading us to, you see the TW as you do the two and you start thinking, okay, it's double of something.
Mm-hmm.
Am I on the right path?
Absolutely. And people, I would say adults and children alike, once we start going down this path of word inquiry and word study, they just sort of do it automatically. They're not thinking about it anymore. They are thinking about it, but not consciously. That like now it's like, oh, now I want to know why it's spelled this way. Now I want to know why that silent letter is in there. Oh, now I'm noticing that G in the word sign that didn't really make a lot of sense to me until I realized how it was related to signal, which is pronounced.
My mind is being blown right now. I love this so much. I love it. And, as speech paths, of course, we're wordsmiths. Of course, we love this. And I mean, I know I'm geeking out right now. I'm sure everybody else listening is geeking out because now how much fun you're bringing so much fun back into this rather than here's a group of words. Here's a list of words. I want you to go and memorize those. You're giving the context. And I think what I'm getting out of this is our brains want to see patterns.
Right. Absolutely.
We are searching that out. We want to find the connection.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, forever changed. I love it.
Well, it's funny. One of my colleagues, Pete Bowers, he has this saying, and I hope I'm not butchering it, but I want to say he always says that nothing satisfies like understanding.
Oh, that's true. I mean, when you understand where something came from, and you share that now, you can, I love that. That's true. Nothing satisfies more than understanding. That's right. Beautiful. Yeah. All right. I know I might have gotten us off a little tangent there. Let's get back on track. Where should we go next?
Okay. Let's see. I was looking through my notes here to see if there was anything that we should touch on. But I guess one of the things I would say that I know that we were going to be talking about upper elementary through high school, but honestly, we start working on this when kids are younger as well. Obviously you have to scale it down or scale it up depending on the age group, the ability level of the students with whom you're working. But kids are amazing. They're really so intuitive. One of my other colleagues the other day was mentioning that, and I think her daughter was either preschool aged or kindergarten aged, but she said something like, well, all these kids were included, but I was outcluded. And so, you know that no one ever taught her the word outcluded, right? Mm-hmm. She never heard this before. And so that shows us that she at a very young age already has very good morphological awareness. She's aware of where the break in the word should happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. That's right. We oftentimes when we hear a child do something, we think, oh, that's silly, that's cute. But in fact, it's really super intelligent.
It really is. It really shows just how smart they are, and they're taking those cues and the ability to know where to break that word down. That really shows that a lot of sophisticated language.
Wow. Yeah. You're changing our way of thinking. I love this.
Oh gosh. Well, and it's really well supported by the research too. I mean, there have been a couple of meta-analyses about interventions that target morphological awareness and how that positively impacts certain areas. Like we know it definitely spelling is a big one, decoding, which is just the flip side of spelling, but also vocabulary knowledge. Kids are using their knowledge of the morphemes that are, especially when we're talking about polymorphemic words, very complex words with lots of parts. They may not know every morpheme in that word, but if they know some of them, that can kind of serve as a bootstrap to help understand the word. And to do this, like when I'm working with my graduate students, for example, I have them make up words. And, I show them that like other people can guess what the words mean. Now, the rules, there are rules on this, like we do have to start with some roots or some bases that are known to everybody and some affixes that are known to everybody. But one of the examples I use is microheliology. So if you know micro,
Small.
we know helio, sun, and then that ology part.
So the small sun ology, the study of?
The study of small suns. I mean, and it's not a real word, so but you can kind of create these and then they realize, oh yeah, that's how we all learn words, because to a child, all the words are new, right? It doesn't really matter if it's a nonsense word or not. If it's unfamiliar to you, it's unfamiliar. And you have to use what you have to figure it out.
I know this is a blast from the past, but it kind of made me start thinking about the Pokemon cards.
Yeah.
Sorry, but and being able to figure out what really they have names like that.
Right.
And it's a nonsense name, but breaking it down exactly, it makes sense.
Absolutely. And Harry Potter has quite a few like that too, which I think is a nice segue. If you have a child who's at least interested in something like that, like Harry Potter, then you can really take off with that, because they absolutely use a lot of these roots and bases. And, speaking of roots and bases, I should maybe kind of talk a little bit about some of the terminology that we use whenever we're talking about interventions with morphology at the core. And I think everybody on this podcast is probably pretty familiar with the word itself, morphology, but it is the study of word formation, like how words are formed, but not just how they're formed, but how they're broken down as well. So you want to know how they're, you can compose them, but you also want to be able to segment and dissect them and break them down into their meaningful parts. And so those meaningful parts, those would be the morphemes. Morphemes are comprised of bases and roots and affixes. And that's where I think things get a little bit tricky, is that whenever we're looking at the language that's commonly used in school, so even in the Common Core State Standards, we'll hear the way the word root is used. Technically, what we're really talking about is a base. So a base is a morpheme that conveys that primary meaning of the word in which it's embedded. Bases can be free bases or they can be bound bases. Free bases, exactly what they sound like. They can stand on their own, like the word house, tall, fly. Make perfect sense. Bound bases, however, must be attached to another base or an affix. And so we get bound bases like JECT. And the reason I'm spelling it out is that technically these morphemes don't have a pronunciation until they're attached to something else. And so technically we should be spelling those out. So JECT. So we see that in words like reject, project, inject, but you can't eject something, right? Same thing with like sieve, like you can conceive, perceive, deceive, but you can't sieve. So those would be bound bases. Now, a root, on the other hand, again, like it gets used a lot in school language, that's what, what I'm calling a base might be called a root in school language, but root is technically the historical origin of a base.
Okay.
And so that's where, I just want to make people kind of aware of that, because depending on whatever resources, I just wanted to make people aware of that, because depending on the resources you're going to, the books you're reading, some of these terms might be used differently. And it's, I'm not asking you to change all the things that you say in the classroom or anything like that, but you want to be sure that you're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And there are some terms that I'm not sure that are as familiar to everyone out there working with literacy. So if you can indulge me, I'd like to go over some. Would that be okay?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
So I think we're pretty familiar with inflectional morphemes and derivational morphemes if you're in the literacy world. But inflectional morphemes, these are suffixes that when you add them to the base, they communicate just a little bit of grammatical information, such as past tense ed, third person singular s, progressive ing, those types of things. Derivational morphemes, there are a lot more of these. These can be prefixes or suffixes that when you add them to a word, they either change the grammatical category of the word, like the part of speech. So an example might be beauty, which is a noun. And if you add the suffix ful to it, then you get beautiful, similar in meaning, but it's a different part of speech. So that's definitely a derivational transformation. Also, you can have a change in meaning. So if I say something is legal and then I add the il prefix to it, illegal, well, it's still an adjective, but it has a completely different meaning. It actually means the opposite now. So that's another example of a derivational transformation. And then transformations can also be transparent or opaque. I also add in a little category of semi-transparent in there. So with transparent transformations, this is whenever there's no change to the spelling or the pronunciation of the base word following the addition of another morpheme. So I'll give an example of that. So if, let's say we have the word jump, J-U-M-P, and we add the suffix er, jumper. Well, we still hear the word jump in jumper, right? There's no pronunciation change. We can see J-U-M-P in jumper, so there's no change in spelling. So that's completely transparent. That one's pretty easy to see and hear. Freedom is another example, free to freedom. F-R-E-E is in freedom. We also hear free in freedom. So I'm going to switch over now to some semi-transparent transformations. And I call them that because there's either a change in the spelling or in the pronunciation of the base. And so an example here might be happy to happiness. So we don't hear a change in happiness. It still sounds like happy is in there in happiness. But there is a shift in the spelling because we toggle the Y to an I, or, we toggle the Y to I before we add the N-E-S-S. Or magic to magician. That one, the spelling is preserved, but there's a pretty big shift in the pronunciation. So we still see M-A-G-I-C in magician, but there's a big shift in the way it's pronounced. And then opaque, these are the hardest ones because there's a change in both spelling and pronunciation. And so an example here would be deep, D-E-E-P, to depth. So you've had like from long vowel to short vowel, and also double E to single E. So that's a pretty significant shift. 3 to third would be another one, 5 to fifth. Those are harder. Those are harder because you have a change in spelling and a change in pronunciation. And a couple more that I think would be really beneficial for anybody working in literacy to know too, is that, have you ever heard the term twinned root or associated roots?
No.
So these are these roots that actually have different spelling. So if we remember that the root is that historical origin of the base. So I'm going to use the example of PED, like as in pedicure or pedestrian. And so that PED means foot. That's the origin of the word. But there is a twin, so POD. So we have words like podiatrist. So it just means that there is another way to represent that root. So PED is one way, POD is another way. We see this in other words like QUES and QUIR are like question, quest, inquiry. They all have the same meaning, but there are variations in the spelling. And so that's why there's a little bit of controversy about the word twinned root, because twin implies two, but sometimes there's more than two ways to spell it. So that's why we say sometimes associated roots. And just like the roots have variations, so do prefixes. So we have assimilated prefixes. Oh my goodness, this is something I really wish that teachers and SLPs in schools would just explicitly teach to students, because I think this is so eye-opening. And kids oftentimes will say, well, why did no one ever tell me this? This makes so much sense now. And I would tell them, I wish somebody had told me that when I was your age as well. But an assimilated prefix is a prefix that changes its spelling depending on the first letter of the base to which it is attached. And the example I like to use here is the prefix in, meaning not, like incapable or something like that. So not capable. In. Okay. Well, that's the most common spelling of that prefix. However, whenever you're going to attach the in prefix, meaning not, to words that begin with the letter R, like regular, do we say in regular? We don't.
No, we don't. No, I see where you're going now. Okay.
So now that in becomes assimilated. And so it becomes an R because that's the first letter of the word regular. So it becomes irregular. It's not a different prefix, though. It's just that the spelling has been altered. It gets assimilated into the word. And more than likely, and I will tell you, I'm not a linguist, I'm not a language historian, but more than likely, somewhere along the line, it probably was in, but because it is difficult to say in regular, it probably just got assimilated in our pronunciation to irregular. The same thing with words beginning with L. So if I say something is not logical, then it is
illogical.
Illogical. So that IL, the IN.
Yeah.
And then if I say words that begin with bilabial sounds like probable, I don't say improbable, I say
improbable.
Improbable.
But yes.
The bilabial. Or if something is mobile and I say it's not mobile, it's
immobile.
Immobile, right, because of the bilabial. So it just, again, it just became easier to pronounce that way. So it became assimilated. So that's why we call those assimilated prefixes. However, had I known that myself when I was growing up, that would have been so helpful to know that that's just one prefix. You just spell it different ways.
Right. Right. So basically, this is what we as SLPs and teachers need, that we need to be using that strategy and teaching that exact strategy to our students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's when, people may ask me, does breaking down words into morphemes really help students? Like, does it really help them with spelling? Does it really help them with, I was like, yes, of course. I mean, to me, it seems so obvious, but I get it. I understand where some of the, difficulty making that, connecting those dots may be. But if you think about it as teaching a man to fish, as far as like, well, when it comes to vocabulary words, there are just simply too many. I can't teach you every single vocabulary word. Nobody can. Nobody does. We expect kids to like get a certain level of proficiency and then start doing some wide reading. That's where a lot of the vocabulary knowledge comes from, is from independent reading. But if you have a student who is struggling to read in the first place, then, you're really heading down a bad path. And so I think teaching these building blocks of decoding, these building blocks of vocabulary words. And morphemes are just one of those building blocks. They're not the only ones, but they're important ones. And if you can teach them, like, okay, this is how we can break a word down. These are its components. These are what the word are made of. Then they can break them down and recombine them themselves. So that's why I'm saying, like, teach a man to fish. You teach them these strategies, and then they start using these strategies independently. And so it's a good idea to start early and that way that they have a certain level of independence going forward, or at least, the knowledge that they can break these words down.
Right. And that kind of comes back to when you're saying and having that, did you call it a morpheme wall?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Being that, especially for the upper elementary, well, more so actually the secondary student, giving them that scaffolding so they're not having to, because sometimes if you don't know, you just are like, I don't know it, but then they have somewhere to look. They don't have to be like, okay, I feel not smart right now because of the word what that was just said, and so I'm not. But being able to be like, okay, I'm looking at that word wall now. I heard that. I can now make that connection to what that word actually means now.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I guess since you brought that up, it would be nice to kind of talk about how this really applies across different curricular content areas. because I don't think that gets enough airtime.
Yeah.
I think a
Yeah.
lot of people still think about literacy as being something you do in English language arts class. But it's important in science, it's
Hmm.
important in math, it's important in social studies, it's important in all of it. In fact, excuse me, um, I did a project a few years back with a third grade class. I've also done it with a fourth grade class at a local elementary school here. And what we did was we created a morpheme wall based on Latin and Greek roots that they were studying in their curriculum that year. And so we handed out index cards. Each child had a Greek or Latin root on their card, and just below it had kind of the meaning of the word. And the children were to just draw a quick little symbol or something off to the side to give them like some quick recognition of what the word means or the morpheme means. So, for example, TRI might be one. It means three. So the child could either, write the number three, or they could draw a triangle, whatever, helps them remember TRI means three. And so we put them up on the boards. And then the next part of the project was that we gave the teacher some cups to set on her desk. And in each cup were colored cardstock. So we had 4 different colors. And one was labeled science, one was labeled history, one was labeled, I think, English language arts, and then one was just other. And I don't remember which color we assigned to which now, but what we did was every day with the bell ringer, she would ask her students if anybody had any interesting words. Did anybody find any words that contained those Latin or Greek roots?
Hmm.
And so what they would do is, and she would just do it for like 2, 3, sometimes 5 minutes at the beginning of class each day. So it wasn't a huge time. And they would come up to her and say, okay, I found a word that I want to share. And she would check it for him, make sure it indeed did follow that rule. Because as an example, one child found the word trigger and he's like, oh, it's got TRI. And it's like,
Oh,
well, it's
yeah.
that is not a root. So that what she would say, yeah, nice try, but no banana. Yeah, and you'll
Yeah.
have to do that one again. Um, anyway, but what they would do is if they did indeed find a word, and they knew the meaning of the word, so they would write it down on that little piece of cardstock. She'd give them a glue stick and they would glue it next to the morpheme on the morpheme wall.
Okay.
And by the end of the school year, it was a glorious mess of just little sticky notes everywhere, which made me very happy. But what was so great about that is because it was color coded, and they would ask him, where did you find this word? Was it during the science lesson? Was it while you were reading? Was it during math class? What was it? And what was interesting is these were very colorful morpheme walls at the end. And it really helped them understand, like, oh, no, this is important in every content area. It's not just about reading or writing. And then they also saw that a lot of words, yes, the number words like you and I, or, poly or hexa or whatever, like those were showing up a lot more in math class, but there were still, like, think about how quickly they were learning those words and being able to just fluently participate in their math lessons because they knew the vocabulary associated with it. So anyway, so morpheme walls, great for that.
Yeah. And how fun to and so collaborative,
Mhm.
because you could get all the teachers involved with, like, almost like find the Easter egg, like the teachers
Oh yeah,
involved of, okay, here's a good word, and somehow pepper that into your lesson and see if kids
Mhm.
pick up on that.
Absolutely.
That's
And
fun.
especially if you're giving them like little special things, like in that particular class, that teacher was very strict. Students had to raise their hand to stand up, and
Oh boy.
and
Yeah.
so, but she made a special exception. If you found a good word, you just come right up, and they loved that.
Oh
They
my gosh, that's incentive right there. That's a great
loved
incentive.
it.
Yeah, and just, children are full of wonder, and giving them some guidance and incentive to investigate, be a word investigator.
Yeah,
Um,
it's so much more fun than just memorizing words. And here's a word list. memorize these
Right.
words before we start reading. Nobody wants to do that. I don't want to do that.
No, no. But being a detective, I mean, it sounds so much more fun than
Right. It's a puzzle to figure out.
yes, yes. I think, yeah, I love a good puzzle.
Yeah. Who
Um,
doesn't like Wordle? Who doesn't?
yes, exactly. Yeah. And then making just education itself fun. And I love that this is all tied directly to their education and their academics and it's so relevant for them for what they're learning. They're learning the word because they're just immersed into it.
Right.
Fantastic.
And then once they learn to do it, it's pretty interesting. Even that the word wall, the morpheme wall I was just talking about in third grade, what was interesting to me anyway, was we had a break, spring break, and then this one child came back and he and his family had visited the Grand Canyon over the spring break. And he wrote down all these words in his little notebook that he took with him on vacation. Brought them to school, and he was so excited that he learned the word hydrologist and hydroelectric power and things like that. That was all from reading the little plaques at the Grand Canyon site. And so he was so into it that he actually wrote them down, carried these words with him from his family vacation, and was so excited to put them on the morpheme wall. So I think that speaks volumes.
It does. It does. Because when the student knows that we're not just learning in the classroom,
Mhm.
you're you go out in the world and learn. It's all around you.
Right.
Be able to bring their world then back into the classroom. I bet all the kids wanted to, first of all, hear about the trip. But
Yes.
then as they're hearing about the trip, now they're learning the words, or
Mhm.
he's actually being able to teach the word. When you teach it, you really know it.
Mhm.
You're giving that power to the individual, to that student. And I love that. Talk about generalization right there. Gosh.
Yes, yeah, teaching them. Well, that and speaking of which, there was another project I did. It was the same classroom, but a different year.
Mhm.
Well, same teacher, I guess I should say, different students, but still third grade. We did something very similar, but instead of a morpheme wall, we gave each of the kids a morpheme and based on a Latin or Greek root, and they were to create their own city based on that route. And they got so creative. It was amazing. I mean, it was just really, I think telling people, when I tell people about it, they would always say, really, this is third grade? That doesn't sound like third graders would have done. No, it's like, no, you give them the tools and they will run with it. They will absolutely do this independently because it is so fun and it taps into their creativity. It keeps them very motivated. But so one of the examples was CY. I need to spell on paper instead of in my head. CYCLO. So that's where we get words like cycle, cyclone, things like that. So that was one of the roots that one of the kids got to pick and create their city. And so they created their city, and it was like Cyclo City, I think is what they called it. But they got really interested and they said, well, the city is not in a grid pattern, it's in a circle.
Mhm.
So it looks like a bicycle spoke. And that's the way all the streets come to the center. They talked about how people ride bicycles everywhere because the cycle is part of that was in the route. They are very green because they recycle everything. Everybody brings their own water bottles. The only bad thing about living in Cyclo City are the daily cyclones that happen. But talk about creativity. They knew that they had to use these words. And so first that was the first part. Let's investigate. Let's find other words that are related. Part of that morphological family. And then once they made a list of those, we would incorporate it into their story. And then they also, they kind of took the ball and ran with it. They came up with a lot of ideas that, I didn't tell them to do that, but, each kid started, oh, I want to have a flag for my city. And so all the kids wanted a flag for their city. And then it had to be, related to their word. So they had a symbol or something like a circle or a, whatever it was. And then each one had a mayor, and then the mayor had something to do with the word. And, it just we just kept going and going. Like they didn't want to stop. And then they created a little map of their city. And then every street name had something to do with the word. So
Wow.
and these were not things some of the things, yes, I prompted them, but a lot of them, they just came up with it on their own. It's like once they got started, they didn't want to stop. They wanted to keep investigating.
It's so creative and you just it's endless. It's endless on where you can go with this. Like
Right.
I'm sure all those listening and me included are just going, wow, give me more. What else can we do? There's so much.
Yeah.
Talk about being invested in your own education. I love it. And I take it that collaborating with the teachers, they were an all go for that.
Yeah, it's always tricky in the beginning because, people are never really sure, like, why is this person wanting in my classroom and what's going on? And,
Yeah.
what are their motives? But once you kind of get a foot in the door and you realize that you're all working towards the common purpose, they see you as an asset. Like this is somebody who is not only going to, help, spread the labor. It's not just me. But I'm also going to work with the kids that are probably the problem kids in the classroom, those kids who are struggling. So they stop paying attention. And if they stop paying attention, they're cutting up,
Right. They want to mask why that they're not paying attention because they don't want to say, I don't get it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and if you're coming in and you're saying, okay, I'm gonna lend a helping hand, and I'm gonna take those kids that like, you're having the most problems with, every day, or, the struggle, that really makes you a very attractive asset for the classroom. So, but yeah, and just keeping them abreast of what's going on, why you're doing what you're doing. And I was only there once a week, so I wasn't even there very much, but I would always leave some things with the teacher, like if you want to keep this going, here are some things, but it's up to you. But that was one of the things in talking with teachers that I found is that sometimes, maybe they have a lesson that went like shorter than they had expected, and they just have like this little extra time, or you always have those kids who finish before everybody else.
Right.
And, you got to keep them occupied. And it's like, well, here, and we just leave a stack of things, ways to keep those activities going in the classroom. And so if you have a random moment, if you need a time to have a bell ringer or something to keep the kids occupied, then they have it. And I think that's another good way to kind of, keep those collaborations fruitful.
And for the speech path and those of us listening, thinking about, okay, so what would our goal be? We're going in, I know we're working with all the students, but we have our students in there that we're working on direct language with.
Sure.
And their goal of vocabulary.
Well, one of the things that I love about this is that you can work on one activity. It's great for group work. You can do one activity, but one child may have a goal for spelling. One child may have a goal for reading comprehension. One kid may have a goal for vocabulary, and one may have one for decoding or whatever. But you can still all work at the same time on one activity because it's benefiting all of those things anyway.
You're hitting all the targets.
Right.
And and I love that. I think as SLPs, we're really all wanting to work smarter. Right? Being able to do an authentic activity that reaches all the students you want to reach, and you're able to pull in different aspects and different targets for each student, yet we're all working on the same goal rather than, I guess, singling out a student.
Right.
The way
you're very piecemeal approach when, instead of a scatter shot.
Right. And the students, it's almost like the students wouldn't even know they're learning. I mean, they're, you know what I mean? They're being targeted for learning. Everyone's learning. And yet,
yeah. And absolutely. And that's these classroom activities. Definitely, we would have all the students in the whole class working on them. But I kind of grouped the kids who needed extra help, and I would sit at their desk with them, their pod, whatever. And I would be there because, one, you're always going to have like at least 2 or 3 kids in the classroom, probably, who need, who have an IEP. But then for every 2 or 3 kids who have an IEP, there's probably another 5 or 6 who don't have an IEP but are struggling. And so, it really is a good prevention measure too. So you can kind of get in there, not only work with the kids who have a documented need, but those kids who are struggling. And if they don't get some help soon, they're going to be referred and they're
Right.
going to be added to your already swelling caseload.
Yeah, so let's get in there and be working with the ones that we have on our caseload and be working so the ones that aren't on our caseload don't get on our caseload.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. I think we're all on board for that.
Absolutely.
And I think also being speech pathologists, our scope of practice is knowing language and modeling that for some of the teachers and really showing why we are who we are and why we do what we do is because we do have extensive knowledge on this. We do have the training on this. We are the expert on this. And I think how we can benefit and what we actually do.
Right. It's not just about our SNL.
No, right. Exactly. We're not a teacher. Right. And shows how we kind of can showcase
complement each other's skills,
Yes.
Yeah.
Be transdisciplinary.
Absolutely.
I like that. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love going into the classroom and, not only is it great for me, it's great for the kids, because they're not missing valuable class time. Because I think it's just, absolutely. There are times when you got to pull that kid out of the class. I get that. And I'm not saying that, I'm opposed to that. I just think that we should be judicious and, not pull kids out when we can work with them in the classroom, because it just seems so difficult. If you have a kid who's already struggling and they're missing valuable lessons and things like that, and they're just, falling even further behind, really complicated.
Right. So, if you think about why are we even here? What is our goal? Really? Our goal should be educational access. And are they accessing their education if we're taking them from their education to be doing something isolated versus showing them a strategy in an authentic situation where
you can learn this lesson that you're being taught right now.
in real time, not have to be, and it makes sense to them. Like if you taking a child out and saying, okay, we're going to learn I-B-4-E or whatever you're going to say. And then I-B-4-E, and then it means nothing when they go back to the class because now they're in,
And then they encounter the word beige and then they say, explain that.
Yeah, right. I love that. That's awesome. That is awesome. Wow. Is there anything that I know that we've gone through quite a lot today, terminology, really broke down how really teaching the meaning, the history, that was an eye opener for me, especially with your analogy with the number 2 and how that came about.
Yeah, I did kind of want to go back to the vocabulary piece a little bit, because one of the things that I found super interesting when I was just working on a recent manuscript, and I'm looking for I can't remember the exact name, but I know that Groves is the name of the researcher. Okay. And he's not an SLP by any stretch, but I think it's like more of an education researcher. But anyway, he looked at science textbooks. And he compared the number of words that students must learn in an introductory biology class. And we're talking introductory in like freshman in high school.
Okay.
And he found that it was like 2 to 3 to sometimes even 4 times as many words as a freshman college level foreign language class.
Whoa.
I'm going to let that sink in for a second, because that's, if you think about a foreign language class, especially at the college level, you think, okay, well, every word is new, right? Every word is a brand new word. But because of the way science words are, there are a lot of derivatives, so absolutely, you're going to have biosphere, that sort of thing. But when you're just doing a frequency count of the number of new words, but 2 to 3 to 4 times as many as a foreign language class. So that's a lot of vocabulary. It becomes extremely important that you know that vocabulary for science. It's important that you know, even if you don't know the vocabulary, but you have the strategies for learning the vocabulary for like things like social studies, because there's so much independent reading involved in social studies. You have to do a lot of reading, and that happens offline, not during class time. So that's another important reason. And then also even the vocabulary used in math classes, even simple nouns used in math, not even the operators, but just like the nouns. Like if you think about the Greek roots and the Latin roots, which are not the same. Well, sometimes they are the same and sometimes they're not the same, which can also make it more confusing.
Right.
Like, deca here, but hepta here. Why is it dy, like dyad here, meaning two, but di over here? Anyway, but there's a lot of reasons that we need lots of vocabulary knowledge. I forgot what I was going to say. But going back to those histories of words, one of the examples I like to use for science is the word atom. So,
Okay.
Carol, I'll ask you, do you know where the word atom comes from?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. No.
Well, okay. It's actually comprised of two. So A, meaning not, and TOM, meaning to cut.
Oh,
I think you had a light bulb moment there.
I know. Those of you that are just listening, I did have an aha. If you could have just seen my face, the light bulb went on. Wow. Not put them together.
Yeah, so because obviously in the past we didn't think, well, it was before my time, but scientists didn't think that they could cut an atom. That was like, okay, we got down to its most elemental state. You can't cut it, you can't divide it any further. So that's where the word comes from. It comes from not cut, because they believed it could not be cut, couldn't be split. And
we won't go into the splitting atoms now. I think that's for another time. But
okay.
I want to leave on this aha that I've had many ahas with you today. You've really opened my eyes to actually want to dig deeper and be more authentic when I'm looking at how I'm attacking, approaching, teaching, and these goals for our language kiddos on our caseload. And I'm looking at, because really basically let's bring it down to what is really needed. Vocabulary.
Vocabulary, yeah. And then, once you learn the meaning, the spelling comes along with it for the ride, decoding. If you got the vocabulary, you're going to have like improved reading comprehension. I mean, there's just so many wonderful byproducts.
So we're gonna slow walk me to this epiphany. If I heard you right, we start with the meaning, which gives us the spelling. When we have the spelling, we can decode. Where did we go from there? There was another.
Sure. I was just saying, like, if you have the meaning and you know the history, so it's not just the meaning, but I'm also saying the history. Because the history is going to help, with the spelling.
That's what it was. That's the missing piece. The history with the spelling. Right.
Right. Because, we know that certain letter combinations, certain graphemes, are going to come from different historical origins. So like a word that begins with a PN, well, like pneumonia. Well, that comes from Greek, that's not a very common one. That's why I brought that one up, because it's kind of easy to identify. But, that one, we're definitely going to say that comes from Greek. Or a CH being pronounced K, like the K, that comes from Greek as well. And so the history is going to help drive the spelling. So we know that if we have a word like chromosome, so going back to my old word wall, morpheme wall science days, but that CHR, we know that that's going to, when we see that combination like that, we know it's going to be pronounced as similar to the K instead of like the ch.
Yeah.
Like we don't say chromosome.
No, we do not.
So that helps with the spelling, but also the decoding. And, and then once you have some good vocabulary knowledge and you're good at decoding, then we're going to have good reading comprehension as well, and reading fluency.
I love it. I love it. That just really, I just made myself this little pathway of the meaning and the history, the history, give us the spelling. With that, we start understanding the spelling. Now, when we're reading a new word, we're starting to decode. And then when we're able to do that, it increases our reading fluency and comprehension.
Absolutely.
Wow, yay! I feel like I got an A today. Wow, Ginger, this has been amazing. This little journey, well, it's been a big, big, deep journey, but it's been so fun. I've had several aha moments. And those watching us got to see it in my face. I came to life when I got that light bulb went over for me.
Well, nothing satisfies like understanding.
There you go. Oh, I love a full circle. Nothing satisfies like understanding. I love it. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time. I want to keep going, but I can't. So I do hope that means that you might be open to coming back and joining us again, talking about this again. We would love to have you back.
Sure.
This has been wonderful. And I thank everybody that's listening today. I hope you guys are taking away what I took away. Wow. Thanks, Ginger. I love
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay, well, we'll have you back. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe.